What if I told you this Olympic gold medal didn't begin on the ice, didn't begin in America, and didn't even begin with Alysa Liu, but in a tiny mountain village in China where there was no electricity and no clear path to the future? Picture southwestern China in the mid-1960s, a remote village in Sichuan province with dirt roads and barely 200 people, where one of 6 children studied by whatever light he could find and helped his mother farm while his father worked for the government. That boy was Alysa Liu, and decades later in Milan, Italy, his daughter stood on the Olympic podium with a gold medal around her neck as the first American woman in 24 years to win individual Olympic figure skating gold. And you cannot understand Alysa Liu without first understanding Arthur, because his journey is one of the most extraordinary origin stories behind any champion you have ever seen. Arthur was born in Mingyang, raised without electricity, fought his way into a boarding school, earned both a bachelor's and a master's degree in China, and then 1989 happened. And if you know Beijing and you know that year, then you know we are talking about Tiananmen Square, where students and citizens gathered in the largest pro-democracy movement China had seen in decades, demanding reform before the military rolled in with tanks and gunfire. The government counted the dead in the hundreds, while independent estimates placed the toll far higher, and the Communist Party worked to erase it from history. Arthur Liu was there, a young man who believed in change, and when the crackdown came, he understood exactly what staying would cost him, so he left everything behind and started over in California as a refugee with a law degree that meant nothing in the American system, and a language he was still mastering. He put himself through law school again, rebuilt from zero, became an immigration attorney because who better to guide newcomers than someone who had lived it himself? He built a stable life, but he still carried one dream from that powerless mountain village. He wanted a family. So at 40 years old, single and without a partner, he made a choice most people would find overwhelming. He used anonymous egg donors and surrogate mothers to have 5 children, first Alysa, then Selena, then triplets Julia, Justin, and Joshua. He did not wait for perfect timing or the right relationship. He chose fatherhood on his own terms. His mother Shu moved from China to help raise the children, and at one point, all 7 of them lived together in a 1-bedroom apartment in the Bay Area with 3 bunk beds squeezed into a single room. And Alysa would later say she remembers that time with warmth, crawling across bunk beds late at night with her siblings and missing those crowded moments, which is not the childhood people imagine when they picture an Olympic champion. No mansion, no private rank, just a single dad grinding to make it work. When Alysa was 5, Arthur took her to the Oakland Ice Center because she had endless energy and he happened to be a huge fan of Michelle Kwan. He thought skating might be a healthy outlet and had no idea he was stepping into history. She began group lessons with Laura Lepetsky, who had trained under Frank Carroll, and almost immediately it was clear she was different. She moved to private coaching at 5.5. By 10, she won intermediate gold at the U.S. Championships as the youngest female ever. At 12, she became the youngest woman to land a triple axel in competition. At 13, she won the U.S. national title against senior skaters, breaking a record held since 1997 by Tara Lipinski. She became the first American woman to land a quadruple Lutz internationally and the first female skater ever to land both a quad jump and a triple axel in the same program. She was redefining the sport while her father was spending around $150,000 a year on coaching, choreography, ice time, travel, and costumes. A man who once studied without electricity, now investing 6 figures annually into blades and dreams, and he simply said he spared no money and no time. Yet behind the medals, Alysa has spoken candidly about how unusual her childhood felt, skating every single day at 13 and 14 while other kids were discovering hobbies and friendships, attending the Oakland School of the Arts when possible before switching to homeschooling and completing assignments at her father's law office between sessions, graduating high school at 15, admitting that skating sometimes felt more like obligation than passion because as a child you do not always know what you truly want. She was a prodigy who sometimes felt confined by her own brilliance, carrying the future of American figure skating before she could even drive.
She made the Olympic team at 16 and competed in Beijing in 2022 under security due to threats connected to her father's political past, returned home with a world championship bronze, and then shocked the sport by retiring at 16, saying she had skated since age 5 and felt content, choosing instead to explore life beyond the rink, traveling with friends, going skiing, enrolling at UCLA to study psychology, even trekking to Everest Base Camp over 17,000 feet above sea level simply because she could. And somewhere in that freedom, the joy slowly returned. She announced her comeback in 2024, but this time everything was different. She chose her own music, her own costumes, her own style. She asked her father to step back from daily involvement, and though he admitted it hurt a little, he respected her independence. She was no longer skating to fulfill someone else's vision, but to express her own identity. And in March 2025, at the World Championships in Boston, she stunned everyone by winning gold, the first American woman in 21 years to claim the world title. She had hoped merely for a top 10 finish in her return season and instead reclaimed the summit. And then on February 19, 2026, in Milan, with her father and all 4 siblings watching together, she delivered the performance of her life, landing every jump and owning every moment before shouting in raw emotion when the scores confirmed it, ending a 24-year Olympic drought for American women since Sarah Few's in 2002, and capturing gold at 20 years old, while her father, who once fled from tanks so he could someday build a family, wept in the stands. And what makes this story extraordinary is not just talent or discipline, but the fragile chain of events that had to align. A massacre survived, a country left behind, a career rebuilt from nothing, a decision at 40 to become a single father through science, a cramped one-bedroom apartment filled with bunk beds, a spontaneous trip to a local rink inspired by Michelle Kwan, years of financial sacrifice, political pressure resisted, burnout endured, identity rediscovered, and finally a triumphant return achieved on her own terms. Every link in that chain had to hold, and somehow it did. Because Alysa Liu's gold medal didn't begin in Milan or even in California. It began decades earlier in a dark mountain village in Sichuan, where a boy dreamed of a world he could not yet see and refused to stop believing it was possible.